Hi, my name is Krista Buford, and I had Johnston Chapter 6, Is There Something Special About Reasoning? The chapter opens with Bridget, a BCBA, and Alan, a 5-year-old with autism. She's been working with Alan for 2 years, and he has made substantial strides in all the goals she's had for him, and she wants to continue to further his progress. Her question to open the chapter is, what exactly do you teach someone if you want to improve their ability to reason about events and circumstances in their lives and figure out how to solve problems both large and small? Johnston attacks this question through attacking the idea of reasoning. So what is reasoning? Well, reasoning in a basic sense is a noun. It's not a physical thing or process. It's not separate from operant behavior. It's simply verbal behavior. The proposition is what we know, believe, think, judge, or assume. So an example of a proposition is grass is green. The book gives the example, the sky is blue. So it's just a simple statement about what we think or know. Tax is a term that is coined by Skinner, and they're statements about what we know that are consistently reinforced in the presence of a particular object or event or a property of an object or event. There are two kinds of tax. There are pure tax and abstract tax. The pure tax has no other source of control, so it's literally just the object or event. So a ball or a couch or a table, and the abstract adds a property that controls the event or object. Orange ball, brown couch, black table. How are propositions and tax related? A proposition adds to a tax. The assertive autoclitic is the word is. The ball is orange. The couch is brown. Proposition states a relationship between the pure tact, ball, in my example, and one of its properties, orange. Quantifying autoclitic modifies the listener's reaction to the proposition itself. This would say, some balls are orange. All couches are brown. A proposition's effectiveness is determined by whether or not it receives reinforcement through being accepted or believed. A proposition doesn't necessarily have to be true. It just has to be reinforced by being accepted. That's the way that a proposition becomes effective. It doesn't become effective through being true or false. Premises and conclusions. Offer easily accepted propositions prior to the conclusion. So in order to make the conclusion more easily accepted or accepted by more people, you start off giving easy propositions to begin with. You build a systematic sequence of premises to reach a conclusion. For example, my husband called me on his way home. He said he'd be home in 10 minutes. 10 minutes later, I hear a door shut to a car, and I assume my husband is home. I don't assume that because I have no prior knowledge or I didn't know he was coming. Right now, I'm not expecting any other guests. He said he'd be home in 10 minutes. It's been about 10 minutes and somebody's home. So I conclude that my husband is the one that's about to come in the house. Reasoning does not identify discrete response classes or patterns. It's just colloquial notion. There's no scientific understanding to its foundation. Logicality and rules. Types of behavioral patterns or regularities result in rules. The rules may serve as means of controlling behavior. Just because behavior is consistent with a rule does not mean that it's controlled by the rule. All this means is that it's controlled by the consequences that have come about that fall in line or are consistent with the rule. When propositions correspond to the rules of logicality and probability of reinforcement is maximized. Deductive reasoning. Rules of logic. So this breaks down basically basic grammar. So conjunctions, two propositions that are otherwise separate. So it's adding them together using the word and. It is raining and I am doing laundry. It is cold outside and I am reading a book. These are otherwise completely unconnected events, but you add them together conjunctively. Disjunctions connect two propositions with the word or. So an example is it is rainy or it is sunny. Implications connect two simple propositions by an additional verbal response. An example is using an if-then statement. If it is raining, then I am going to stay inside. Deductive reasoning can lead to false conclusions. So just because you have deducted that something has caused something, it doesn't make that statement true. Deductive fallacy is when other events could explain the event. For example, the grass is wet, so you assumed it rained. You have deduced that it's rained. However, the sprinkler system could have gone off, somebody could have washed their car the night before, a variety of events could have taken place that means that it didn't necessarily rain. So in order to avoid all this, you have to eliminate all other explanations. Inductive reasoning does not conform to formal rules like deductive reasoning, but it is defined by patterns or regularities in verbal responding that result in a higher probability of the listener accepting a proposition. There are two types of inductive reasoning. Mill's method of agreement, which means a common factor across various circumstances may be considered as the causes of a phenomenon. For example, there are people all over the country who are getting sick. Well, upon investigating what's causing sickness, you notice that there are similar diets. So then you start to investigate the dietary practices in those reasons to see, in those areas, to see if there is a common factor causing these individuals to become sick. Reasoning by analogy, for example, is if two couples go out to dinner and 3 of the 4 get sick, the 4th is likely to get sick as well. So it's not necessarily true, but you would assume that the 3 who were sick got sick because they ordered the same food off of the same menu from the same restaurant. And the 4th, who also ate the same food, will eventually get sick. Could something else cause the sickness? Yes. Do we know for sure it was the food? No. What's the difference between inductive and deductive reasoning? Well, through a scientific approach, there is no difference. Both deductive and inductive reasoning are verbal behavior, and both provide ways of offering premises or rules that often result in listeners accepting the conclusions. Doesn't mean, again, that the conclusions are true. It just means that people are more willing to accept them. Reasoning in circles was in box 1. So this just argues that A implies B, which implies A, and it's an argument to prove itself. The biggest, clearest example that I could find of this is arguing that the Bible is true and it's God's word, so we must believe it. So it's using the fact that the Bible is God's word, which is written in the Bible, to argue that we should believe it and not doubt it. So it's a circular argument. It's not written somewhere else that we should believe the Bible because God wrote it. It's written in the Bible. So the Bible is true, so you should not doubt the word of God. And it's a circular argument. Science, logicality, and truth was box 6.2. And it says logical reasoning is not always true, and illogical reasoning is not always false. Just because somebody sounds crazy doesn't mean that whatever conclusion they get to isn't true. Deductively fallacious reasoning is common, which is what we talked about, where if you can't rule out all other explanations, you can't for sure say that the explanation you came to is the actual cause. Reasoning is not what makes something true or false. Invalid reasoning is not the cause of a false conclusion. How must we view reasoning? As behaviors, we cannot view reasoning as a symbolic activity that involves private subjective meanings. It's a verbal behavior, and it only affects the listener's reaction. So my ending questions to you are, if in behavior analysis, inductive and deductive reasoning are nothing more than verbal behavior, why does Johnston dedicate an entire chapter to distinguishing amongst the various types of reasoning? This is a question that I asked throughout the entire thing. Just curious what your thoughts are. What is an example of circular reasoning? Like I said, the clearest one I could find is the Bible is true, so you shouldn't doubt God's word. And then give an example of someone who uses the process of ordering his or her propositions in such a way that the majority of the listeners will agree with the conclusion of the speech, regardless of what that conclusion is. So this has been my presentation. I appreciate you guys taking the time to watch it, and I look forward to your discussion.